So we'll be talking today about the integration between two systems, TermWeb and WorldServer. First, I'll go over the TermWeb setup I have. So it's the basic. It's not special in any way. It's a basic TermWeb setup, and then I'll go into details about what is required in WorldServer to get the connection or get the synchronization process to work. But let's start by logging into TermWeb and have a look at what we have there. So I've created a database here called URI demo, and right now it doesn't have anything in it, but let's have a look to see how it's been configured. We have a dictionary that has a number of languages. So I've defined 3 languages in this particular term base, Dutch, French, and English, and we have a number of concept level and term level fields. These are all standard TBX fields that have not been modified, so I've just accepted the fields that existed or that you can pick from in the TermWeb configuration. So I just selected the fields, and in the demo I have here, I've selected all the fields that the integration supports. So basically you need to have those fields defined in your dictionary in order for the integration to work, even though you might not be using all of them, so you don't have to necessarily populate all of them. They need to be defined in your dictionary in order for the integration to work. So that's concept level fields and term level fields. I don't think we need to go into every one of them. We can talk about them later in case there's any questions. But that's the basic setup of my TermWeb dictionary. So that's the first part that you need to take care of. And the second element are the sections. Sections are very important for the integration in the sense that they will define or from within WorldServer you can define which sections you want to look at, so which sections you want to sync with, and also we'll need a dedicated section for WorldServer to write terms to. So we'll be syncing from TermWeb to WorldServer, and we'll be able to identify one or more sections or configure one or more sections that we want to sync with. And the other way around, we'll also be syncing from WorldServer to TermWeb, and that's a kind of a little bit of special synchronization, because the idea is that TermWeb will be the main point of managing terminology. So everything approving a term approval, the whole term approval process will take place in TermWeb. But still, users that are working in TermWeb, in WorldServer, sorry, will be able to suggest terms that they come across in the translation, during translation, and those terms we can push them to TermWeb to a dedicated section that's typically called proposals or something of that sort. So the people managing the terminology in TermWeb can look at those terms, can go through them, and can assign the appropriate metadata to it. So that's something important. So in addition to just creating the dictionary, you also need to create a section. You'll always have one section in a dictionary. As soon as you create it, you have a dictionary with the same, or a section with the same name. But you will have to at least create one additional section, and I've called it proposals here, that the proposals coming from WorldServer will be written to. But more about that when we look at the integration or the configuration on the WorldServer side. But that's basically it as far as TermWeb is concerned. Create a dictionary, create a dedicated section for receiving term proposals from WorldServer. So let me now switch to WorldServer, and we'll go over what you need in WorldServer in order for the integration to work. So let me start by creating a new tab. So first thing you'll need to do, obviously, is to create a term database in WorldServer. So if you're familiar with WorldServer, I'm sure that you know how to do this. You would need to go to Linguistic Tool Setup, Term Database Setup, and then create a database. So it's very simple in WorldServer. I've created a term database URI demo. You just add a term database, you provide a name, and that's it basically. So there's nothing specific about that. So first thing, create a term database. Second thing is to create your locales. Typically, if you're working in WorldServer, those will already have been set up. If that's the case, then there's nothing you need to do as far as that's concerned. But if not, then you will have to create your locales in WorldServer. So for locales, you can choose between region independent locales, like I have English here, for instance, without any regional classifier, or you can have locales that consist of the language and then a region where that language is spoken. So that's something that you also need to configure up front. Next thing that you need to do is create attributes. So when you're creating a term database in WorldServer, you're just creating an empty container, so you don't specify the metadata right away the way you do when you're creating a TermWeb dictionary. In WorldServer, what you need to do is create these attributes separately. So just in the same way that we selected metadata or concept level and term level fields when we were creating the TermWeb dictionary, we need to create attributes on term entry level, it's called in WorldServer, and term level to match the attributes or the metadata that we specified in our TermWeb dictionary. So you do that by going to customization, selecting attributes, and there you basically define the same attributes than the ones that we selected in TermWeb. So in TermWeb it's a little bit easier in the sense that it's all pre-configured and you just need to select what's there. In WorldServer you basically create them from scratch. So I would click add here and then specify whether I'm creating an attribute for a TD entry or for a TD term. So entry corresponds to a concept in TermWeb and term obviously corresponds to a term. So for instance, I have a definition on concept level, so then I would select TD entry and then definition. I would provide a name and then I would also tell WorldServer this is not going to be an attachment kind of field, but this will be a text area where I can enter my definition. So you would go through that, creating the same values or fields that exist in our TermWeb dictionary definition. So you can see them listed here. It's basically the same things. It's definition, source. There's two special ones. So most of them correspond to the fields that we selected when we're creating the TermWeb dictionary. There's two special ones that are also needed but that do not exist explicitly in your TermWeb database definition or dictionary definition. And that's TermWeb section. This is just a field that was added to show in WorldServer which TermWeb section this information is coming from. So you'll need to create that one separately as a text field so WorldServer can populate it. And there's also a from TermWeb, which is a Boolean field that just indicates that a term is coming from TermWeb. So the synchronization, as I explained earlier on, will typically go from TermWeb to WorldServer in most cases because TermWeb is our main terminology management system. So whatever term is synced from TermWeb will get this check mark from TermWeb, so the WorldServer user can see that this is a term that has come from TermWeb. So that's it. So we've created a term database, we've created locales, we've created attributes. The next thing we would need to create is a mount. A mount is basically a connection to a file system in WorldServer where you can store files. And we need this for storing a property file that will hold the connection details for the integration. So the URL or the web service endpoint, the TermWeb web service endpoint, and the credentials that are used for connecting to TermWeb. So we store that information in a mount, and a mount, like I said, is basically a connection to a file system. So you would go to asset interface, asset interface system, the AIS, and you create a mount. If you already have a mount, you can also use a subfolder of an existing mount, but it's a good idea to create a separate, at least a separate directory that you can set permissions on so not everyone can has access to that file because it contains the login and password for TermWeb. So it's a good idea to shield this off for most users. But as soon as you've configured a mount, then it will become available in the WorldServer Explorer. Let me show you. So as you can see, I have a TermWeb configuration mount here, and in there I have a simple properties file that will contain the connection details for the web service. So let me open that up. Here it is. So it just has the web service endpoint that you're pointing to and the credentials that are needed to connect to TermWeb. So that's the mount, and then last but not least, what you need to do is import the code that will actually take care of the integration, the communication between the two systems. So that's a custom component or a couple of custom components that are called business rule classes, so custom business rule classes. And that's just one zip file that you need to upload by going to management, administration, customization, and then business rule classes or clauses, and there you would simply browse for the zip file and upload it, and that will add a couple of custom business rule classes. So you can see clauses. So most of them don't have a check mark. They come with WorldServer out of the box, but we have created three new ones that you'll be needing for the integration to work. So you'll need to import those into the customization section in WorldServer. And once that's done, then basically you're ready to start configuring the integration. Because right now we've just been setting up the building blocks for the integration. Right now it's time to actually set up the integration, configure the integration. So how can you do that? It's also something that you do through configuration WorldServer. So you would go to linguistic, oh no, not linguistic tools, but to business rule linkage, rules. WorldServer has this notion of a rules engine that allows you to automate certain processes on either triggered manually or triggered on recurrence intervals. So you can see a couple of examples there of rules that have been created. And let's zoom in on two of those. We have the URI-demo export and URI-demo import. The import is basically WorldServer connecting to TermWeb to retrieve new terms that have been added in TermWeb and pull them in and import them into a WorldServer terminology database. And export will do the opposite, so it will take terms that have been added in WorldServer and push them out to TermWeb so they can be reviewed and validated in TermWeb. But let's start by looking at the import feature. So for creating this rule, we will be selecting a number of rules for this, or clauses for this rule definition, and we'll be specifying some parameters for those clauses. So first of all, the first thing you need to do is indicate what type of rule you're creating, and obviously we're creating a term-based rule here for the connection with TermWeb. And first thing you'll need to do is specify which term base you want to connect to, or which term base rather you would want to import the terms into. So this will be a drop-down of all the term databases that exist in your WorldServer configuration. So you would just select one of the available term bases. I'm going to select URI-demo and confirm. The next property you'll have to specify is what conditions the rule should check, but we have not implemented any conditions for this rule, so we can skip this step. And the next thing is do you want to configure this the import or the export. So you can do different things. Either you can for instance, you can only import if you're only interested in importing terms from WorldServer, but you don't want to push from TermWeb, but you don't want to push new suggestions from WorldServer to TermWeb. Then you can just simply select this one option in the rule. If you want to have the synchronization work both ways, then you can select both options. If you select both options in the same rule, then the recurrence schedule for executing the rules will be the same. So what you can also do, and that's how I've done it for this demonstration, I can create individual rules, so separate rules, and then I can trigger the import and export processes separately. So that's up to you how you want to work with this. Do you want to combine them into a single rule that will execute at the same recurrence schedule, or do you want to have them in separate rules so you can execute them at different intervals? So that's up to the user to decide. But basically what I'm doing here is indicate that I want to import terms from TermWeb to WorldServer. The first property I have to specify then is this properties files, and that's the one that I showed earlier on. So that's the file that contains the connection details to TermWeb. So you'll have to tell the rule where it can find that file so it can make the connection to TermWeb. Then the next thing you need to do is enter dictionary sections, or a dictionary first to start with. So this is the name of your TermWeb dictionary. So that's the dictionary I was showing earlier on. That's the name of the dictionary. So you have one WorldServer dictionary that you can map to one TermWeb dictionary. In that dictionary, you may have one or more sections that you want to sync with, that you want to retrieve terms from, and that you can specify those sections by using a comma-separated list. So if, in this case, I've only configured one section, but in case you have multiple sections defined in your TermWeb dictionary, then you can add them as a comma-separated list, and then terms will be retrieved from all those sections. So that's the next thing that you need to configure. Are there any exceptions to this rule? We didn't configure any or implement any exceptions, so we can skip this step. And then finally, you have to indicate whether you want to execute this rule manually only. So that means that a user needs to come in and click a button in order to trigger the synchronization, or you can have the synchronization take place on a particular schedule. So if I select the schedule, then you'll see that I get this option for selecting a recurrence schedule. Recurrence schedules are configured elsewhere in WorldServer, so I have 4 options here, but I can configure as many recurrence schedules as I need to. So if you need the synchronization to happen at a particular day or at a number of days in the week at a particular time, then you can create your own recurrence schedule and link it to the rule, so the rule execution will happen at the time that you want it to happen. But right now for the demo, I'm not going to work with a recurrence schedule. I'm going to go for a manually only rule, so then you see that I don't have to select a recurrence schedule, and I can just trigger the rule when I want to sync or trigger the synchronization. So this is how it works. So we have a rule for importing, we have a rule for exporting. If I want to trigger the import, what I have to do is, because it's set to be executed manually only, I need to select the rule that I want to execute and then click the Execute Now button. Again, if you want to work with a recurrence schedule, then you would select the rule to execute on a particular schedule, and then you can see the first rule here, for instance, is scheduled to happen hourly, so every hour the synchronization will take place. But this is, again, how you want to configure it. It's pretty flexible in what you want to do there. So before we do anything here, let me first start by creating a term, because right now I will show you the term database is actually empty on both sides. So I have an empty URI demo term database. There's nothing in it on the WorldServer side. And I have, if I go to my URI demo term dictionary in TermWeb, it's also empty. There's nothing in there. So let me start by adding a new term in TermWeb, and then we'll see how that syncs to WorldServer. So I'm going to start by adding some some metadata on the concept level. So for source, let's say this comes from my dictionary, and the definition for the term I want to enter is this is a four-legged animal that barks. To save this as my metadata on the concept level, and then I want to add a term. I want to add a Dutch term. That's the language that I have configured. Oh no, I need to use the Dutch word. And I can specify the metadata. I don't have to. So if I want to stick to this and just add my Dutch term and nothing else, that's okay. But you can also add additional information that you want to sync. So this word in Dutch is masculine, and it's actually a noun, and this isn't finalized term, so it doesn't need to go through approval again or anymore. And this is an admitted term, let's say, so I can use this. So I added my Dutch term with some metadata. Now let's do the same and add an English term. I can provide some context. And I can do the same. I can add gender, any information I like to. Okay. And let's leave this user status empty for now, and let's see what happens. And let's see how we can sync this information to WorldServer. So for that, I would need to go back to WorldServer to my rule execution section. And what we want to do is we want to sync from TermWeb to WorldServer. So that's the import rule that we created, or that I created previously. I select the rule that I want to use, and I can execute it. And that will confirm what's happening. So it's found two terms in the dictionary I specified, and it has imported these into WorldServer. So I can confirm this success message, and then go to my term dictionary in our term database in WorldServer. And if I refresh the screen now, then we'll see that it actually has something in there. So if I do a search, then I will find the terms that I added in TermWeb. So you can see that the two terms have been added, but their status is different. So this one has a green check mark indicating that this term is good for use, and this one has a question mark indicating this term has only been proposed, so has not been verified yet in TermWeb. And this is because, if you remember what I did, I added usage information for my Dutch term, but not for my English term. So for my English term, I specified the processing status, so it was finalized in terms of processing, but I didn't specify usage status. And the usage status is actually what is used in the integration to specify whether a term is good for use or not. So as long as that information is not completed on the term website, then we'll have nothing, or it will show up as proposed in our WorldServer section. So if I click on the details of this term, then you'll see that also the metadata that we specified in TermWeb has been moved across. So we have the definition that I specified, which will show up on entry level in WorldServer. You also see that it shows the TermWeb section that the term was actually, or the concept was taken from, and also the metadata that I specified on term level has been copied over. So if I go to my English one, for instance, and you see that this context sentence that I added has also been brought over. Note that you have this read-only field from TermWeb that indicates that this term has actually been synced from TermWeb. So that's basically how the synchronization from TermWeb to WorldServer works. Now let's see how we can also propose terms from WorldServer and have them appear in TermWeb. So for that, I'm going to create a new term, or a new entry rather, in WorldServer. And let's say I want to add another one in the same field. Cat is my English term, and let's say that I think this is good for use. Some metadata in there. I can do the same. Does it also edit? So I have a question. When we edit something in TermWeb, will it be reflected in WorldServer? Yes, it will. This is also something that we can that I can show later on. But if you make any changes to an existing term in TermWeb, then it will be synced again the next time the sync is triggered, and the changes will be reflected in WorldServer. So it's again a noun, etc. So you can specify whatever metadata that you think is suitable. Let's add a translation as well. And let's put this as a preferred translation. And I'm not going to specify anything else, just save this term and save my entry. So we have a new term now with an approved English variant and a preferred Dutch variant. And it works pretty much the same way as the import rule. So I'll now execute the export rule, and well, before I do so, let's quickly go through it. But it's actually very similar to what we had in the import rule. So first we select which term database that we want to export terms from. It's the same one that I'm using here, but you can use a different one. We need to specify the configuration file that has the credentials. We need to indicate whether this is an import or export rule. So I've selected export, and depending on what you select here, the options that appear will be different. So as you recall from the import rule, in the import rule we could specify multiple sections that we wanted to sync with. If you select export, then you'll only be able to specify one section. So whatever comes from WorldServer will always be written to the same section in TermWeb. And in this case, we've called it proposals, so that you'll find terms coming from WorldServer, you'll find those in the proposal section in your TermWeb dictionary. And then this is the dictionary that we want to sync with. And if I move to the end, again, we can choose between executing rule on a manual basis only or on a particular schedule. So that's basically it as far as the definition is concerned. So let's see what this does. I'll select the rule that I want to execute, click execute now, and it will push the 3 terms that we suggested and push them to TermWeb. So let's move to TermWeb now. Let's see what the result of that is. So I have 2 sections in my dictionary, so I can click on it by clicking on this field. I'm looking at my proposals section now, so that's the one that new terms are being added to. And indeed, I see that a new term has been added with the English, or a new concept has been added with my English term, my Dutch term, and the metadata that I specified in WorldServer. And I think that basically concludes the round trip of what I wanted to show. So again, if you want to now, I did it in 2 separate rules. If needed, you can combine the import and export routines into a single rule and also execute it on a recurrent schedule, so have it execute automatically instead of triggering this synchronization manually.